The recording is started. And then if you put your thing on speaker view, you will be able to see me is in the large image. So the first fly I'm going to tie, this is a dragonfly session for me. The first fly I'm going to tie is this guy here. That's a dragonfly larva, and you'll notice that it's fairly short and fat. Certain dragonfly larvae are short and fat, and others are longer and skinnier. This is the short and fat variety. The hook is, like you say, it's a relatively short shank hook. It's a standard shank length. It's a wet fly hook, so it's a little bit heavier hook. So let's just get this thing set up so that you can see my fly and everything here and get some light on it. So hook and device, this one is a barbless hook. The pattern comes from a book by Skip Morris. It's The Art of Tying the Nymph. And the pattern is called the Tailor Dragonfly. And it's short and fat. So the first thing we put on is the tail. I've got some olive, because this one is going to be olive. You can tie them in olive and brown. I'm tying this one in olive. So I'm going to start the thread about mid shank, and I'm going to wrap that down to the bend, and that's basically where the hook starts to bend, right past where the barb would normally be. The tail is going to be bits of pheasant tail, and I have a golden pheasant tail here because my other one is kind of boogered. And I'm going to pull off probably 4 or 5 strands of pheasant tail. I'm going to take it right off the shaft of the feather, and I'm going to measure this tail. These guys have short little tails. The tail is going to be at most shank length, tied in right over top of the bend. So it's going to stick out on this hook. It's going to stick out about the gap width behind the fly. And you can see, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push the stub ends down and bind over top of them a bit to a point just about a little past halfway down the hook shank. Trim the butts off. Now, in order to give the right body shape, I'm going to use a little piece of wool here. And I'm going to tie that down right at that spot. Pull it back just so it's bound. And I'm going to wrap over top of that, all the way back just a little bit shy of where the tail is tied in. Then I'm going to bring my thread forward and out of the way. And then I'm going to take my chenille, and this stuff is, I have 2 sizes. I have a skinny one and I have a thicker one. I'm going to take the thicker chenille and I'm going to just bare the bits of thread at the end there, and I'm going to tie that in right where I had before. Pull it straight back and wrap down the hook shank over top of the chenille, right back to where that wool was tied in. And then I'm going to take this wool and I'm going to wrap it in touching turns forward over top of the chenille, leaving my thread back there for the time being.
Dave, do you weight this fly at all?
Nope, not weighted at all.
No, okay.
then I'm going to wrap this back over top of the body. And then you can see what I'm trying to do is I'm not going quite to the end. And then I'm going to start back forward again. I'm not going to go quite to the end. And then going to go back and make a wrap. So you see now I got a little bit of a football shaped bump there. And the last thing I'm going to do is wrap my thread over top of that to make sure it's all bound down and tie it off. And you'll see now that my football shaped body is ending just a little bit in front of halfway down the shank. That's it for the underbody. And this is going to get covered because now I'm wrapping my chenille over top in touching turns over top of the yarn bulge, the yarn football. And then when I get to the front here, I'm going to tie it off on top. So you see you've got this little chenille football. That's the abdomen of the dragonfly. And these, I think they're called darners, these guys. They're very bulky in the center. And I'm going to put legs on him. And I want the legs, the length of the legs to be maybe double gap. So I'm going to take my, and the feathers for this, I've used a green dyed saddle hackle. And I'm just going to put enough of these on to create a set of legs out to the sides and the bottom. And to do that, I'm going to peel off all the fuzz off the bottom. And I'm going to stroke these so they stand out at the side. And this is the traditional tie-in, the wet fly technique. I'm going to pick about shank length of the fibers, stroke them back, and I'm going to tie them with the tip facing forward at that gap. I'm going to pull this up and tie off in front to cinch it down and lock it in. And then, wherever I put my scissors, I'm going to come in and just snip out that stem. Then with my hackle pliers, I'm going to grab that stem at the butt end. I'm going to stroke these guys back out of the way so that the barbs go to the rear. And each one of these wraps, I'm going to do the same thing. And I should get 3, maybe 4 wraps before I'm done. So that's about 3. Tie it off. Same way as before. In here and clip that. There we go. I'm going to get all these strays and I'm going to stick them out the back. There we go. Now I've got the smaller chenille. This stuff is, if I can find the end, this stuff is actually ultra chenille and it's a little different color. Ideally, you'd want them the same color, but I just didn't happen to have the same color of regular chenille. Where's the end? There's no end to this. Oh, there it is. I don't need very much of it because I'm going to get like 3 wraps here at the most. I'm going to tie that in the front.
11 phases, and the difference is they're beginning to get a little bit of ground in the carries, and they're sucking in Italian defenders.
Whoop, somebody better mute. So I'm going to get a little bit of a small head on this thing. I'm going to tie that down. And trim that off. Now these dragonflies have a wing case. So what I want to do is I'm going to make a flat spot on top here. I'm going to get in with my scissors and I'm going to snip out those hackles on the top, right on the very top, to create a space on the top. Go back to my pheasant tail. And I'm going to take a section that's about a little less than gap width. I'm going to pull that out at more or less straight out. And I'm going to trim it off the stem close to the bottom. Then I'm going to move my thread just in front of where that hackle is. I'm going to tie it down, tip facing front, wrap it down so that this section of stuff is right on top of the hook. I'm going to trim the butts out, or the tips that are sticking out. And then I'm going to come in behind and I'm going to trim as well about half the body length behind. So I have these bits of stuff that are going to stick up there that are a different color from the hackle. I'm going to bring my thread forward and I'm going to whip finish it. Now, that didn't work. There we go. And we'll just double up on it. So there we go. Now we have this little football behind the legs, and we have a little wee bit at the front, and the hackle sticking out at the bottom and sides for legs. And that's him. Nothing to it, fairly straightforward. And like all of these guys, you're going to fish them on a sinking line, and you're going to fish them slow with a little bit of an erratic recovery so that you get a bit of a darting motion. That's him. Now the second one is the longer version, and it's got a long body compared to the last one. And this one comes out of another Skip Morris book called Tying Foam Flies. Quite interesting. And this one is called The Predator. And this one's a little more complicated. And it's intended to be an easier one to tie than the Reg Denny pattern, which was the Sulfur Dragon. And the Sulfur Dragon, the trick with the Sulfur Dragon is the body has some toothpicks tied alongside the hook here that give it some buoyancy. And the idea is that the buoyant fly fished on a sinking line will rise up above the weed bed. So when your line goes down and lies on the weed bed with about a short 6-7 foot leader, the fly is going to ride above that so it doesn't get hung up on the weeds. And it will fish right where the fish are. So now, what did I do with that? So this one I'm going to tie using, this is foam. And so it's the standard 1/8 inch thick foam. And I use a razor blade and a straight edge to cut the strips. So you'll see I've got a couple of different widths of foam strip. I have a wide one and a narrow one. So the wide one is basically the gap of the hook. So this is a number 10. It's a 9672 or something like Mostad. And it's a 4X long, because you get, these ones have long skinny bodies. So again, talking about length of hook before, it's mostly to get that long skinny body at the back that we're going to tie in. Now, it's the same general process. Wherever I just lost my bobbin for a minute. Rats. I must have thrown it on the floor. Oh well, oh well. Start with a different thread then. This would normally be green thread. So I'm going to start right at the point of the hook. And I'm going to tie on, rack back to the bend. I'm going to turn that off. And again, I'm going to do the same thing with the tail. Some strands of peacock, of pheasant tail. And I'm going to want probably 6 or 8 that I'm going to pull off of there. I'm going to make this a little more robust. I'm going to measure him so that it's a short tail again, not much more than gap and a little bit behind the hook, the bend of the hook. And I'm going to wrap down. Now the Skip Morris pattern has a bare hook underneath the foam. And quite frankly, we were talking the other day, Florin and I, about the naturals. And the naturals, you know, they're not clean bugs. They've got all sorts of crap attached to them because they live down in the weeds. And so I didn't think a bare bones hook underneath the foam was going to work as well as if it had some fuzzy under there. So I'm going to put some fuzziness underneath this thing. I'm going to tie the foam on first. And what I do with the foam is before I tie it in, I'm just going to snip a little point on it. There's a little point there. And I'm going to lay this down so that I'm going to bring my thread forward to where the point of the hook is. And that's where I'm going to put this point of the foam. I'm going to wrap on top of that. Just to get the foam to sit on top of the hook. Then I'm going to wrap back over top of the foam and cinch it down nice and tight. And I'm going to take it right back to where the tail is tied in. Good and solid. And then, because these things have a tendency to rotate, the foam has a tendency to rotate, I'm taking my Zap-A-Gap and I'm going to put a little bit on my thread here. That's the brushable type. And I'm going to wrap a couple of threads down there with glue on it. And that Zap-A-Gap will make sure that the foam doesn't rotate on the hook shank. And then I need my dubbing. And for this one, I'm going to use I've got a box of Davy Wolton's SLF dubbing. And the one I'm going to use here is an olive brown. That's a nice color. It's not entirely olive, but it's a little dirty because, as Florin was saying to me, these flies have got a lot of crap that gets attached underneath them. So I'm going to put something in that represents the muck and the crap that these damselfly nymphs will pick up in the weeds. And I'm just going to dub a very loose thread here. And I'm just going to wrap it over the hook shank You can see it, it's nothing any fancy. It's kind of, try to give it a little bit of living appearance rather than just plain foam. And I'm going to wrap this up the shank. Again, small amounts of dubbing are better than large amounts of dubbing. It means you can make a nice compact body and control the thickness of the body. A little more. Pretty straightforward. And I'm going to come up till it's a little past halfway. I don't want to crowd the head because I've got a few things to go on at the head of the fly, and I need room. So you see, I've left a good, I'd say 1/3 of the hook shank in the front there, maybe a little further. There we go. Now I take my foam and I pull it forward, hold it firmly with thumb and forefinger on top, and pull the thread over top and cinch down. And then wrap in front. Then I'm going to come in here with my scissors and trim it about as short as I can get. Now, once again, I'm going to wrap this down good and solid. And again, to make it not spin, take my brushable Zap-A-Gap and put a little drop or two on the thread and cinch it in. Now I need the head of the fly. So I have my thinner foam this time. And once again, I'm going to cut that little V shape on the end, the pointed V shape on the end. And I'm going to reverse this time. And I'm going to put it down where the last foam ended. And I'm going to slip the thread over top. And I'm going to tie that point down. And I'm going to wrap over top of the thread, over top of the foam, trying to keep it on top of the hook, right up to where the eye of the hook is. I'm going to let that sit out there. And again, wrap good and solid down here. So now I have this narrower foam hanging over the eye of the hook. And then once again, wherever it went, I'm going to take my super glue and again, coat the thread a bit with that. And just right smack in the middle, I'm going to wrap that a couple of wraps. This again is to keep everything from tending to rotate around the hook. That'll cinch it in. Now the next thing I need is these guys, which is plastic bead eyes. They come on a little thingy. Throwing everything on the floor today. So I'm going to take that plastic beads and I'm going to put them in this little gap here, right exactly halfway in. Couple of wraps from back to front, a couple of wraps from front to back as a crisscross. And before I cinch these down, I'm going to just make sure they're centered on the hook. And my Zap-A-Gap again, a little bit on here because these eyes will rotate. And I don't want that. So I'm gonna do it, wrap over a few more times, crisscross. Now they're gonna stay in place, they're not gonna rotate. So far, so good. Now we need legs. And the legs on this guy are rubber hackle. It comes in a strip that you pull it apart. And I'm going to take the rubber hackle and I'm going to lay it crosswise across those eyes at the top. I'll show you from the tilt. I'm going to lay it crosswise like that. And I'm going to leave it at least the whole length of the hook. Shane can bend right over top of the eyes. And I'm going to wrap that down with it on one side, come around and then wrap an X across. And you'll see now I've got that rubber hackle line crosswise the eyes. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to trim it off right at the tail. And I'm going to lay it the other way, whole hook length across in the other direction and make that wrap over top. Wrap on the other side. And place that so that I can measure back to where the tail is. Whack it off. Then I'm going to take a little more of my dubbing and apply that to the thread. And once again, I'm going to crisscross over the eyes. I'm going to wrap in behind them and then in behind the legs and in front of the legs to try and push them down a little bit. That's good. Bring my thread back. And then I'm going to take this foam and pull it back over the top to right behind the eyes. And I'm going to wrap and cinch it down so it covers up that space in between the eyes. And when I've got it good and wrapped down, I'm going to come here and I'm going to trim it short so that I have this little stub that sticks out there. And you see my eggs are now hanging down below the fly to the sides, one in front, one behind. And this is where the Zappa gap comes really good because you're not going to be able to easily do your whip finish on this thing. So the Zappa gap is how you do your whip finish. There isn't one. Get it in there and then you trim your thread off and it's done. So you can trim your legs to whatever length you like. I like to leave these ones hang out front a bit, and then these back ones I'm going to just trim a teeny bit shorter so that they're kind of body length in behind. Now another thing with these foam flies is the foam is uniform. So the trick here is you get a Pantone or a Letraset waterproof marker. And these guys, they're really neat. They've got a fine point at one end and a big fat point at the other end. And I'm going to use the brown one. And I'm going to take it and actually these Letraset ones are really nice because they actually have two sizes of point at the fine end. That's a bigger one and a smaller one. I'm just going to come here and I'm going to mark that foam with the waterproof pen just to give it a little modeling. and just touch up the sides a bit. Otherwise, they're very uniform color. And I don't think the naturals are uniform color. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little bit of a wing case that's poking back, and I'm going to snip a little V in it, just from the corners, and take that middle section out. Come over there. So now you see I've got, it's not cut straight across, it's a V. Rough up the fur on the bottom a little bit, and he's done. So that is the Predator.
Nicely tied, both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty impressive.
It's interesting to do work with different materials like that. That foam is really good. And this, I can recommend this book, Tying Foam Flies by Skip Morris. It's got a whole raft of patterns that use foams for different types of patterns. So it's another material that we don't use a whole lot of. And with again, the purpose with this foam dragonfly is to have it float slightly, be slightly buoyant, so that it's sitting above the weeds. And I've had a lot of good success with my canoe, just laying a type 3 line out behind the canoe and lay it out so that most of the fly line is out about a 6-foot leader with the nymph on the end, and just zigzag paddle back and forth across the sunken weed beds. Works very good. So that's it for my pattern. Now we can go to Florin.
Just as a slight aside, I know in Ottawa, when I was a member of the club there, there was a bass bug that we tied using foam, which was a great topwater fly. And I've got that pattern. I have to find the name of it. I don't remember off the top of my head. And I tied a bunch of those in different sizes, and they're great flies as well. I don't know. I've never tried them for trout. Don't know if they'd work, but certainly the foam is used in that extensively.
Well, don't forget we've got bass in Elk Lake.
Yep, that's right. No, it's a great surface fly for sure.
Well, I'll have to look it up in Skip's book and see if we've got a bass popper made out of foam.
I'll find the name and I'll send it off to you so that you know the name as well. Off the top of my head, I just don't remember.
Do you know why they call it the Predator?
Well, because dragonfly larvae are very vigorous feeders. They're a very what would you call it, aggressive nymph. They will eat any small nymphs.
They'll actually eat minnows.
What's that? Minnows. Yeah, if it's small enough minnow, yeah, they'll get them too.
Right.
What size hook did you use there, Dave? I'm sorry.
That was a size 10. I tie most of my flies on size 10 so that you can see them. You could tie it quite big. There are some big dragonfly larvae. All the way down to 14s and maybe. I wouldn't go much smaller than 14. 10, 12s, and 14s, maybe an 8. And this super glue is it's really easy to get. You go to Home Depot, not Home Depot, Home Hardware, and you look for the brushable super glue. It's about $10.
I pick it up at the dollar store.
Yeah, you can get to the dollar store, and it works really well.
What's the brand of it?
There's two. I've got one that the Home Depot brand is Home Bond, and this stuff is called Super Weld.
Because I got some Gorilla brushable, and I find it really.
Yep. That's a good glue. The Home Bond actually fits in my little caddy a little better than the other one. But yeah. It's a good product. So Florin, you're up. Are you muted?
Lori, I think you're muted.
Yeah, could we remind everybody else to mute, please?
Yeah, just give me a second again. I need to reset a little bit here my my camera, and then we should be good to go. Yeah, I was going to show you this little monster. Let me see here. Going to share screen. And now you should be able to see. Of course, as we all know, the alternative to foam is deer hair. So if you don't mind the mess of spinning deer hair and trimming it, this is another dragonfly pattern, which is simplicity itself. You make a big body of deer hair in olive, then you trim it to a cigarish shape, and then you put a hackle of pheasant rump. It's like a deer hair carry special, basically. And it would have similar, floatability to, using various other alternatives. So that's something I'm not tying today. What I am tying today is the Catatonic Leech, which is a fly that almost invents itself as a tying technique, because once you tie on the tails with marabou, then it's very tempting to just keep wrapping that marabou like a chenille to make the body. And that's really all that this fly is. What's more interesting about this fly is the advice on how to fish it, which is take a bobber, hang this fly under the bobber, and leave it there. And then maybe give it a little twitch, and then leave it some more. And at some point, it's going to be hit by a fish. So active fishermen who like to cast and retrieve are not going to like this fly. So this is the kind of stuff to, throw out on the side of the boat and then do something else, and just make sure that you don't lose the rod in the process. Okay, so I am working here with a 9672 Mastad in size 10. And I'm going to add a little bit of weight to the hook. So to start with, I have here some lead wire, and I think this one is 0.25. It's kind of barely visible here on the side of the spool. But anyway, it's 0.25 thick wire. And I'm just going to wrap a little bit of lead wire on the hook before I even start the fly. And what I normally do again is I just prepare a bunch of hooks by pre-wrapping the wire, and then just make sure that you leave enough room here behind the eye of the hook. And then the last wrap here that is a little bit sticking out, you can always just use your fingernail to push it back in a little bit. Okay. So once you got your lead wire and you're happy with where it is, just get some thread. And this one I'm trying to match the color. So this one is kind of an olive dun. It's an olive dun uni thread in 8/0. While this is respooled on my new and fancy bobbin. And then you just attach this, and then the trick here is, because there's no thread base, is just make sure that you actually catch some of those lead wraps before this thing starts running on the hook. Okay. Now, this is not a fly where it's important to do a smooth underbody or anything like that. So you can just basically leave this in a pretty rough state. If I were to do a fly that had like a floss body or something, I would spend a fair bit of time smoothing out these transitions between the hook wire and the lead wraps. Now, for the second part of this fly, now for the easy stuff, just take a clump of marabou. And here I have the tip of a feather out of which I've already tied another fly. And basically, you know, the recipe says use 2 clumps of marabou. Well, you know what? This is thick enough. It's going to do. Okay. And then you just sort of eyeball it, you know, to the size of the hook you're using to see that you get a satisfactory size. So make sure that your fibers are nicely aligned as much as it is possible with marabou, which is fairly unruly. And then I size the tail to be about 3/4 of the length of the hook shank. Okay, so place this at the tine point, do a pinch wrap or 2, and here the challenge is this marabou catches in your thread very, very easily, and you just have to be very, very careful that not everything starts spinning now. Okay. Once you have this reasonably well attached, you can always trim the length of the tail by pulling with your fingertips. I'll show you that at the very end. Okay, but right now I'm just going to leave it in place. I'm going to move the thread, and as you can see, the marabou fibers are just trying to go their own way. I'm going to move the thread forward over the lead and all the way to the eye of the hook, and just leave it there. And now I'm going to take this bunch of marabou fibers and I'm just going to start wrapping on the hook. And you will see this goes on very nicely, just like as if you were wrapping, you know, peacock, curl, or chenille or something else. And this is naturally fuzzy because as you're wrapping these marabou fibers, the little fluff starts to stick out quite nicely. Okay. You get a natural thickening closer to the head of the fly just because of your lead. And at the end, just 2 or 3 wraps of thread over the remaining fibers. Trim close, get rid of the junk, and whip finish. Okay, so I try to smooth out a little bit the rough bits at the front just to make it a little bit more pleasing to my eye, but there's absolutely no reason to insist on that. And I just do 2 whip finishes. There's no need for glue. I'd be kind of reluctant to use any sort of head cement on a fly like this because the whole point of the fly is to have this nice living and breathing fluff. And the moment you approach with glue, things can get matted down and the fly becomes dead. Now, you look at your tail, and if you feel that this tail is a little too neat or too long, all you have to do is grab it by your fingertips and pull a little bit and shorten it and roughen it up in the process as well. Okay. Don't use scissors because that with marabou just gives it a, I don't know what to call it, a bed haircut look. Okay. You want these tail ends to be a little bit rough. And that's it. That's all there is to this fly. And standard sizes for it are 10s and 12s. Done.
Very nice, Florin. Thank you.
And I guess this is also something that, is not just it's called a catatonic leech, but if you look at it, in a pinch, this could be mistaken for a dragonfly. It's green, it's rough. These bugs, they kind of like to camouflage themselves, I think, with debris that's on the bottom of the lake or in the weeds. I remember when I was collecting these bugs and trying to prepare specimens, I actually took a little artist's brush and I was brushing off the debris off the backs of these bugs to actually see what they really look like. Because when you get them out of the collecting net, they just look like a clump of stuff that's moving. So in that sense, this was one of the reasons why we inserted this thing in the dragonfly chapter. And the other fly that I probably should mention here is the good old green woolly bugger with a bead head. That's another fly that's really good to fish for a dragonfly.
I have a question. You were talking about hanging this under a float. How does it compare to a balanced leech?
Well, this one's not balanced, obviously. And you could do exactly what I showed here on a balanced hook. So prepare a balanced hook the same way you prepare for a balanced leech and do this. But I guess that it might make for a better pattern, but it also complicates the tying a significant amount. So it sort of defeats the purpose of this being a really quick and dirty tie. I don't know if making it too fancy deters the fish from biting. I've never tried to.
That's right.
I did have the exact same thought of, wow, why don't I do this on a balanced leech hook? But then I thought, wait a second, this is meant to be a simple pattern.
Yeah, it's great. It's only one material.
It's just one material, exactly. It's like,
and it's such a simple tie. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and if you want to make it even simpler and you don't like to work with lead wire, you put a bead head or a cone head at the head of the fly. There's always a little bit of movement under a bobber, right? So if you have any sort of wind or drift or anything, this idea that you just let it sit there, well, it does, it does move a little bit in the water, even if you don't do anything. So the water will move it around for you. And, it's more of an idea of how to fish things. You can do, I caught fish doing this kind of thing with basic Prince nymph.
If you're too nervous to actually sit still, do little 1/2-inch strips. And all that does is that keeps the wiggles out of your line and keeps it so you can detect the spike.
Yeah, keep your line tight, yeah. Or make sure that the way you cast, that the wind and the way the water is moving a little bit. If there's even the slightest amount of wind, the water is going to start moving a little. And that can also be enough to keep your line tight. And yeah, just learn to sit still, I guess. That's,
I think
can I say?
I saw Phil Rowley's tie of, I think it may be the exact same fly, because it was essentially just the marabou. And he said he leaves it for like 20 to 30 seconds and then he'll just twitch it slightly and just let it sit again for another 20, 30 seconds. So
Yeah, exactly. And if the water is moving in any significant way, you hardly need to do any twitching because the waves will do that. It's hard to sit still. I mean, it's hard to present a fly that's not going to move at all. So anyway, I've already tied myself 2, 4, 6, 7 flies in quick succession. So this is, if you need something that's going to go in quick and dirty, this is definitely a good fly. And I also had luck fishing